Well, welcome everybody. You made it to the last session of the day. So my name again is Gabriela Aguirre, Palosaari, and I work for Santa Ana Unified School District. My current role is as a curriculum specialist, as they mentioned. So that means that I support, Thank you. There we go. Much better. So as I was saying, my current role is a curriculum specialist for the special education department. I am a former student of Santa Ana, so I'm really proud to be here now representing the district on a topic that's really close to my heart. So what I do is support schools with coaching and training opportunities. The past 3 years, one of our priorities at the district is to move and evolve the inclusive programs across our district, but especially in our elementary school sites. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues so they can introduce themselves.
Okay, and as she said earlier, I'm Bianca Barquin. I'm currently a school psychologist at Jackson Elementary School in Santa Ana. I've been in the district working for about 6 to 7 years, starting off as a paraprofessional and moving through different capacities. Currently, the last 3 years, I've been serving as a school psychologist. I afforded the opportunity to actually introduce inclusive practices at Jackson Elementary with my administrator. So we both co-lead our inclusive practices leadership team, and we both work together to provide different supports and trainings at our school site. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Kasey Klappenback. I'm currently the principal of Garfield Elementary School, and this is my 20th year serving the students and families of the SAUSD district. I've been a first grade, a kindergarten teacher, a second grade teacher, a reading first literacy coach, an assistant principal. And so I've been a teacher, a classroom teacher that's actually been part of inclusive practices when I was a second grade teacher. And then as I took over as principal for Garfield, they had already had inclusive practices for a number of years before I came there. So it's been my job taking the lead and taking the ship to make sure that we keep evolving and keep moving forward. So thank you for having us today.
Yes,
So now we want to take the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So we are asking you to please sign into our poll. There are 2 ways to do it. You either enter the URL pollev.com/Gabriela, AGUI 637, or an easier way might be to text Gabriela, AGUI 637 to 37607. So depending on what role you have right now, we would like to see who is in our audience today, whether you're a paraprofessional, classroom teacher, general ed teacher, education specialist, support provider of any type, administrator, and any other roles or capacities. So we'll give you a minute. We welcome our virtual audience to participate. So we see we have a variety.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to give everybody a few minutes just to log in.
And it takes a while to update, remember? Yeah.
Just takes about a few seconds for your text to come through. So where are our administrators? Raise your hand. Oh, we have a large number. Very good. Education specialist? Excellent. Any general ed teachers? Oh, great. Great. No support providers today? Oh, okay. We have one at least. And I'm sure we have somebody watching us. Well, welcome. Welcome, everybody. We just wanted to make sure that we got a feel for who was here. We have a little bit of everything. everyone that makes the inclusive practices team, right? Okay, so now that we know who's here,
And Gabby, why don't we check to see who are the others, the people that
Oh,
responded
yeah.
as others? Would you mind sharing what the others are?
Wait, let me walk.
Psych, okay.
Awesome.
TOSA.
Tosa, do you guys want to share? Who else?
I'm an inclusion specialist.
Oh, great. Any other others? You're an other? Oh, fun.
Inclusion specialist.
Oh, great.
excellent, excellent. So in getting to know you a little bit better, we have another question for you. With regards to special education, we want you to evaluate your own practices at your school district or in your own classroom. How inclusive do you consider your district or your school to be? Whether it be very inclusive, moderately inclusive, somewhat inclusive, or not inclusive at this time, right? Okay, not inclusive, okay. No trick questions. Just reflect. Just a little, maybe one child. Excellent. And again, we welcome our virtual participants to join in. Okay, so it looks like we have a mix. And we're all at different stages. So who are our very inclusive schools or districts? Well, we were going to ask you a few questions. I think if we had to evaluate ourselves as a district, we're somewhere in between moderate and somewhat. It's still an evolving process. It's continuing to improve year after year. So, okay, well, thank you for sharing, everyone. Okay, let's pull up the PowerPoint. And you all have access to the PowerPoint online. So, the name of our presentation today is Essential Steps to Creating Successful Inclusive Programs in a Large Urban School District. So our objectives for today is to introduce you to our 4 I's of inclusive practices, which is a process that we've come up with just to facilitate conversations with our inclusive teams across our district and help support that evolution of including our kids. So through today's presentation, we hope that you'll learn ways to solicit input and expertise from your teams, which can include your school administrators, your general ed teachers, your special ed teachers, and your support staff. We also hope that you can maximize the use of available staff at your school site so that you can increase the collaboration and partnerships among your general ed teachers and your special ed teachers. And then finally, we hope that you can evaluate your current practices and identify opportunities for increased access to less restrictive environments.
All right, so we have this saying in SAUSD, we say, we are SAUSD, because that whole we is that whole inclusive piece, meaning the families, the students, the staff, the teachers, that we're all in it together, and that we want to be proud of who we are and who we represent. And so you can take a look as you're comparing yourselves to our demographics. We're the 7th largest school district in California, with just about 54,000 students. We have a majority of our population are Hispanic and English learners, and free and reduced lunch. So we are, you can tell that we are a large urban district, and that we have some of the challenges, the same challenges you might face at your sites and your district. All right, so as we're thinking about going back and relating it back to the districts that you work in and represent, it is important to know where we're coming from and the challenges that our students and our families face as we're jumping in and moving forward with inclusive practices. And so Santa Ana is the highest number, we have the highest number of apartment dwellings in the whole United States. So we know that our students have limited parks to run around in and those spaces that we know that students and children need. And then as we go through it, you can kind of compare California, Orange County, and Santa Ana as we're looking at the number of people that live in a household in Santa Ana. You can compare it to. You can also look at the median income, the poverty line that represents the students that are at risk there also. And the high school graduation rate, that refers to our parents with their education that they come in with. And then so does the BA or higher. And then you can see the number of people that live in that square mile radius. And then we have that high number percentage of families that have another primary language besides English that's spoken at home.
Okay, so why we believe in inclusive practices, it is so much more than just a service delivery model. It truly is an attitude and a philosophy that encourages a sense of partnership, community, and belonging within the school setting. It's the belief that all students have the right to access general education curriculum and also participate with their non-disabled peers. And I've heard quite often in a few sessions today, but there's a lot of data that shows a link to that feeling of belonging and increased learning in the classroom, increased academic success, in addition to engagement and their own feelings of self-worth. So it's really important for us to kind of shift our mindset a little bit. Another thing I want to point out is that special education is a service. It's not a place. I know historically we've seen it as an RSP setting or a special day classroom, but it truly is a service. It is not the setting. We have to remember this is a portable service and we should be making accommodations to provide it in the least restrictive setting. Another thing I want to point out is that it is in the law. School districts need to ensure to the maximum extent appropriate that our students with disabilities are educated in the least restrictive setting and also have that time to participate with their non-disabled peers. So as we go through our presentation, I just want you to sort of think about that and think about special education as a part of general education.
And then if I can add something to that, at least at our district, when we started to talk about inclusive practices, we did have to be very clear about what we meant by that. Many times our general ed teachers or special ed teachers believed that we were saying that we were transitioning into a full inclusive program. So that was a little bit scary because we know the importance of that continuum of services. So we wanted to make sure it was understood that that would continue, but we would maximize the opportunities for our students with disabilities to be included.
Perfect. So we also want to present with you some data. Some of this data is older and some of it is much more recent, but it's all promoting the same point. And what it is showing here is that our students are demonstrating higher academic success, but also social emotional success from being in the least restrictive settings. In addition to that, it's not only our special education students, it's also our general education students that are benefiting from this. So if you look here, it says parental and general education teacher perceptions as well as empirical documentation suggest that students with severe disabilities are able to learn new skills in regular classrooms. Evidence shows that more opportunities for interactions occur through IEPs written for students in inclusive classrooms and that more reciprocal interactions occur in inclusive settings. Students without disabilities experience positive outcomes when students with severe disabilities are as their classmates. And in a coherent system of education, all children are considered general education students first. And all educators, regardless of which students they are assigned to serve, have a collective responsibility to see that all children receive the education and the supports they need to maximize their development and potential so that they can participate meaningfully in the nation's economy and democracy. So we really want to take from this the fact that all of our students need to be seen as general education students first. It's really important that they feel that way. And we have to do whatever we have feasible and efficient to help support them in the general education setting.
All right, so this one is all about leadership, right? So it takes bold leadership and to really have that vision as a leader to make this happen with your district or at your school site. But it is a process, and it's a thoughtful process, right? And so it's really important that we are building that collaborative implementation with the staff, and make sure that you have the right staff at the right time, that you're able to have that clear vision that protects your school from other initiatives, to make sure that everything kind of encompasses that inclusive practices, that vision. And it does take the whole team, because when fragmentation occurs and there's a mixed message, then that causes divisiveness. And so it's really important to bring in that collaborative effort and the support of the staff and the buy-in. Because certain times as you're moving forward, if you don't have the right support staff at the right time or their buy-in, it's not going to be an effort that is successful too.
All right, so now we get to talk about the 4 I's of inclusive practices. We mentioned at the beginning that we had some essential steps we had developed. One of our challenges in moving forward with this was making sure that everyone understood what we were talking about, what the process would look like, and all of the different steps that it took to do this. So here are our 4 I's of inclusive practices, and I want you to repeat after me. So the first one is investigate. Investigate. Invite. Invite. Implement. Implement. And improve. So we're going to talk about each one. So our first I is our investigation piece. So what does that involve? First, we need to evaluate what we're doing at our school site, identify our current practices, whether it be an RSP model, SDC model, a mix of both. What are other things that we're doing at other districts? Can someone raise their hand? Yes.
Well, we just started an inclusion, like me, I just started last year, so I'm getting a lot of kids here, but I have a caseload now. So I'm looking through the whole district, but basically I go in and I observe first, and I get to know the child, and then we have like a 30-day meeting, and I make a recommendation as to how much service I think that student will need from me.
Uh-huh.
And I also work with the team,
Right.
helping with modifications in the classroom.
Excellent, excellent. Any other type models or service delivery options at other districts? For us, in the past, most of our elementary schools, K-5, had an RSP SDC service provider. So for those of you that are familiar, we were servicing kids inside of the classroom, outside, and then we had our special day class where our mild moderate students were there about 90% of their time. So it was important to reflect and see what we were doing and evaluate those practices, and if they were really working for us, if they were servicing in the best way possible, and we were maximizing the opportunities for our kids to be included. After doing that, we identified opportunities that we could improve on. We identified training or support that was needed for the staff to make this work for the kids. And then finally, our school sites created a vision for their kids that was still reasonable and measurable. Okay, so the first question we had to ask ourselves was if we were truly including our students. So these are some of the things that we were seeing. This first visual that came up, you can see the green dots representing our general education students, and then the colored dots represent our students with disabilities. In some cases, our special day classes, we saw that a majority of those students were in a separate setting, like I said, for about 90% of their day. So, as I said, that was the SDC. In other cases, we were seeing students included with an RSP teacher that was perhaps overseeing 4 or 5 different grade levels. So she was including her kids, mainstreaming, right? But in some cases, they weren't truly included. It's kind of like an island within the classroom. And our goal, of course, was to be more inclusive. Students in the classroom in a way that education and core curriculum was also meaningful to them.
Okay, so where did we start in the investigation process? We started by looking at our allocation of service providers. So this is a sample from one of our schools in Santa Ana. And as you can see here, we have 3 different types of educational specialist teachers. But what we want you to look at and identify is how some of our service providers are overlapping in the services that they're providing. In addition to that, our RSP teacher here is servicing across 6 different grade levels. Imagine how that would feel being able to provide those accommodations, modifications, service all of those students in addition to working with all of those teachers. I completely understand it's really hard. You feel like you're being pulled all over the place. So how can we evaluate this and make some changes to maximize their time with not only their students, but also their general education teachers? And in addition to that, we want to minimize the standards-based curriculum that they need to become experts on. So we use this data to kind of identify some areas that we can help transition and change for our teachers. In addition to looking at our service providers, we also have to look at our caseloads. And as you can see here, we're only presenting the numbers, but as we all know, all of our students require a different amount of service minutes. They have high social emotional needs, high academic needs, so we have to take all of that into account when we're looking at our caseloads. But we want to see if there's a more efficient and effective way to equitably distribute our students across our case managers. So we just want you to think about this data as we go through the PowerPoint, and you're going to see how we made the transition and what changes we were able to make.
All right. So in investigating, we also identified that our staff and our support staff at the school sites needed some additional training to be able to support students. In some cases, especially our teachers that were teaching in a separate setting had not been exposed as much to standards-based curriculum, or perhaps needed some refresher trainings to become more familiar, and vice versa with our RSP teachers. They needed additional training and support. So here are some areas where we thought was important to support our teachers. So caseload management, that was important for both our general ed teachers and for our school administrators, because a lot of the decision making came from them. So it was important that they knew how to manage those numbers, what a caseload was, and how we could manage that in an equitable way among our special education teachers.
Let me jump in a little bit. And I just want to jump in and just speak specifically to what we did at Jackson. So there was a really high need for training for our IAs. So what we've incorporated is monthly, we have a scheduled IA training that either I provide or I'll call out someone from the district to come and provide to them. And our principal has put aside funds to pay them to all come in for an hour throughout the day to get that training. In addition to that, a lot of our teachers needed that co-teaching training. So we have that direct partnership with the district, and we were able to pull someone out to train all of our teachers, gen ed and educational specialists, on co-teaching. And throughout the year, we do a needs assessment to see what do our teachers want, what do our instructional assistants want, what do our special education teachers want, and then we put aside funds and try to do whatever we can to get them access to those trainings. Okay?
All right. Okay, so we mentioned establishing a vision for the students that was clear, focused, while also being challenging and measurable. So in one of the cases, actually at Jackson Elementary, what we determined that was important is that we set certain expectations for our students. So this is an example of a vision that we came up with. So by co-teaching and inclusive practices, our students by the following year, we hoped that they would be included in the general education classroom at least a portion of their day. right? And it might seem easy for some, depending on where you are on that spectrum of inclusive practices. But for us, it was challenging in some cases because our kids were not used to that. We had fifth graders that had been in a special day class for majority of their career, of their educational career. So that was challenging, but we knew we could do it. All right, so our next I, our second I, what was the second I? Invite, okay. So the second I, I'll let Kasey take that one on.
So we definitely want to invite all stakeholders who want to be on a team. So I know that it's really important that we have an inclusive practices leadership team, and that means you want to identify those leaders and make sure that you're offering an opportunity for collaboration so we can come up with that mission and that vision for inclusive practices at your site. And so it's really important to be thinking about all those different people. I know, especially from the speech and language pathologist to instructional assistants to leaders that are general classroom teachers, to really get them on board and give them an opportunity to talk and discuss their concerns and challenges that they might see as obstacles. So you're getting that buy-in, and you're really setting up that stage for that leadership team, but also planning ahead and letting it be known that everything's not going to be perfect, that you're going to make mistakes, right, once you get started, but it's that process that you're going to keep going through and revising and innovating.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the implementation piece and how that works. Every I is multi-layered. So our third I includes looking at our IEPs. Now we're going to get into those IEPs and make sure that we're meeting all of the needs, evaluating the services that the students currently have, deciding whether or not we need to make decisions that are informed based on those IEPs, using data to go along with that, right? Making those informed decisions, looking at our staff allocation and seeing if we're maximizing and using our staff in the most effective way. And then of course, co-teaching is such a key component of that. So identifying those partnerships among our general ed and special ed teachers so that they can become a team and support our students in the best way possible. And then finally, one thing that was key for us at least was developing schedules of both teachers, because we know how important it is to develop those trusting relationships, be able to count on one another. So we made that part of the process. So,
Okay. So most important piece to the implementation is using data to make informed decisions. And we always need to take this back to our students. How can we best meet our students' needs? So when we think about that, we start to think about student learning preferences, which really encompasses a supportive learning environment. So for example, do teachers incorporate the use of flexible seating? What are our teachers' styles of teaching, personality traits? We want to talk about rotations. Some of our students do have modifications on their IEPs. In addition to noting preferential seating, do our students benefit from a more structured environment versus a less structured environment? So we need to take all of these different issues into account when we're thinking about that. We also want to look at present levels of functioning. It's really, really important to look at where are they currently at, and then also their IEP goals. So when we're thinking about that, we want to look at our present levels and IEP goals, and do they match their actual service minutes? Because what we found is that sometimes students are receiving a lot of service time, but it doesn't necessarily match their IEP goals or their present levels. So we had to evaluate that and make a lot of changes. I want to always remind us that we're always looking at the I in IEP. It's individualized based on need, but we have to constantly evaluate that and look at those areas. In addition to that, we're looking at supports, accommodations, modifications. What do our students have in place that they need? and what do we need to provide for them to truly be successful in the classroom setting. We're also looking at behavioral supports, any triggers that they may have, working with a male teacher versus a female teacher. All of that comes into the implementation, and we have to look at all of that. That's why when Kasey talked about the team including everyone, you really need everyone to be involved, because there may be some things that a teacher isn't aware of that a paraprofessional is maybe more aware of. So having them be a part of the decision-making process is really beneficial and strategic for the following year and placement.
Okay, so part of the data, as Bianca had mentioned, is looking at all the different assessments and information that we have so we can make the most informed decisions for our students. So we use statewide testing assessments, any district assessments we had available to us, formative and summative assessments, and then the diagnostic assessments that we had available. And in some cases, we got current data to support our decisions. So it was really important to make those informed decisions about those service minutes, because in some cases we were identifying students that were in a special day class as having strengths that otherwise we wouldn't have otherwise seen. So we were taking them in some cases from being in a special day class 90% of their day and now reducing it to about 50% of their day. So it was important that we had that data to support those decisions, because these conversations we had to have with parents, right, in the IEP team, and make sure that everyone agreed to these decisions.
Okay, so going back to the investigation, you guys saw this slide earlier. So now we want to show you some of the changes we were able to make in this school setting to maximize their supports. So a lot of questions that we had come to us is this transition of the names from RSP and SDC to mild moderate teacher. Really, this is encompassing mild to moderate services being provided to our students. So we made sure that all of our teachers had all the supports they needed and the training they needed to support students that range from mild areas of concern to more moderate areas of concern. And this is academically and behaviorally. So we wanted to make sure that they had the training that they needed, they had the supports that they needed, and anything else that they may have needed to be able to support these students. But what we want to identify here is we were able to minimize the amount of curriculum-based instruction that they were looking at so that they could really refine their skills and become true experts in these 2 grade levels versus 6 grade levels. This gives them so much more time to be able to collaborate with each other, be in the classrooms to provide supports and co-teach, in addition to planning, providing those accommodations, working with the general education teachers. So we really tried our best to maximize their time being with their teachers and with their co-partners so that they could build trusting relationships with not only the teachers but also the students.
All right, so as we mentioned before, co-teaching was a key component of making this all work. So we strategically formed co-teaching partnerships among our general ed and special ed teachers after having divided those grade levels in a more equitable way. Our school leaders tried to get them on board to do it so that it was more of an intrinsic motivation rather than forcing them, because we all know if you're forced into something, your heart is not in it. So that was a true component of making this work. We trained them, we sent them to, I'm not sure if anyone has been to Maryland Friends co-teaching training, but that's a phenomenal training that helped prepare our teachers for this transition. Wasn't all easy, of course. You know, some of our teachers were hesitant to have somebody come into their classroom. In some cases, some of them thought maybe that I'm being evaluated, but you know, we explained to them this is the best thing for our kids. So we had to redefine some of the roles, which included the lesson plans, right? So instead of turning in one lesson plan, now we have a collaborative lesson plan that includes those modifications, accommodations for all of our students. So it was a way to see the curriculum in a more universal UDL way, right? We realized that those accommodations came in handy not only for the students that we're identifying, but also for a large population of our English language learners and other students that had learning difficulties. And so we mentioned, implementing those accommodations and modifications in the classroom. So bringing in that flexible seating and everything else that our students needed was incorporated. It did take our general ed teachers had to shift that mindset, right? Sometimes you have to be flexible and allow those things to come into the classroom. And then another thing that caused a little controversy was the grades. Who assigns the grades and who's responsible for what and that kind of thing. And I see some head shaking, right? So we had to train both our special ed teachers and our general ed teachers. We collaborate, we do this together. We take into account what's on the IEP, and we'll do this together. And then finally, participating in IEPs, not just showing up for it, but you are part of that process of drafting that IEP. So general ed teachers had a voice when it came to drafting those goals, and they provided very valuable feedback so we could write those IEPs that were standard aligned.
And can I jump in really fast,
Yeah.
Gabby? So these co-teaching partnerships are so important because they actually bring up the expectation of both teachers. At times, sometimes it's the special education specialist that comes in and partners with the classroom teacher, and maybe that classroom teacher doesn't know the other students are capable of that, and vice versa. So it helps them come up with better IEP goals together too. It also solidifies like an ownership, right? Sometimes the classroom teacher, when they're an RSP student, they're not really owning their students, as opposed to when they're co-teaching and that child is attached to the classroom teacher's roster, right? So that's including them. And so they are owning what those students are capable of and having that partnership.
Okay, so I think this is a great place to stop and ask this question because it relates to the slide. So the question was, what do report cards look like for students who receive special education services that have a modified program, who are in a SPED classroom? Do you have separate report cards?
Okay, so I'll jump in since I'm the curriculum specialist for the district. We have one standard space report card in our district. We do have moderate severe classrooms that are using a modified curriculum, and we don't require moderate severe teachers to do a standard space report card, but they do report on the IEP goals. For mild moderate students, they're rostered to a general education roster, and so that means they get a report card just like anyone else in the classroom. And in addition to that, they get progress towards their IEP goals. Okay, any other questions about that? That was one of our virtual members.
Question?
Yes.
Since you report on the report
Bring
card,
this to you. Sorry.
okay.
Just so that they virtual.
When you report on the report card that the mild mod students are on, if, say, they were an inclusion student, means they get modified curriculum, sometimes they're 2 to 3 grade levels below the standards.
Correct.
So is there like a symbol or something that you enter in there to show that it's modified?
Not on the report card. We have that in our database, but on the report card itself, we don't mark a student as having an IEP. The general ed teacher and special ed teacher do meet at the same time with the parent. So at the same time that they're getting the standard space report card, they're getting their IEP progress report. We also want to make sure that we report success. And so, they might be 2 to 3 grade levels below their own, but we focus on the progress and the growth that they've made, right? All right, so continuing on with co-teaching, we know that there's, I believe, 6 different models of co-teaching. However, we wanted to focus on the 3 that we know are evidence-based and would work best for our classrooms. And so the first one is the alternative teaching. And this meant that in some of our general ed classrooms, we had either the special ed or general ed teacher teaching that main lesson in front of the class, while the special ed or general ed teacher was scaffolding and supporting that lesson in the back of the classroom, differentiating that way. And then we also have station teaching, and this is one of the most effective ones, at least for our district, and at the K-3 level, we expect our teachers to do workshop. We have Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention curriculum, and so this was the perfect model of co-teaching to see those students and use targeted reading instruction with them. So this meant that we had about 3 different stations, and we rotated, and both specialists got to see students. And then finally, the parallel teaching is the 2 teachers taking about half of the class and dividing that student to teacher ratio, and then teaching the same lesson, but perhaps at a slower pace, or scaffolding it a bit more.
Okay, so while we're trying to encourage these co-teaching partnerships, we really needed to look at the benefits of the co-teaching partnerships. So historically, thinking back, it would typically be a general education teacher with maybe a paraprofessional in the classroom. But now, having these co-teaching partnerships, we're able to have 2 experts in the classroom at the same time. And this is really beneficial for all of our students. So right here you can see we've identified some roles of each practitioner. So our general education teacher is really focusing on curriculum sequence, instructional objectives, curriculum pacing, content depth, concept depth, data collection, brain and processing. And when we thought about our special education teachers, historically they were typically in a separate classroom setting, providing supplemental curriculum, trying to expose them as much as possible across grade levels to the core curriculum. But now that they're in the classroom, they're able to focus on these other roles instead. So adapting and modifying the curriculum in the classroom for our students, motivation strategies for those kiddos that are not motivated, but not only our SPED kiddos, this is beneficial to our gen ed kiddos as well. Language acquisition, this is really important in our district. We're a large urban school district. We have a large population of English language learners, so they really bring that piece to the classroom. Differentiation, really important across the board, but especially for our students receiving special education. The intervention piece, so our special education teachers, they specialize in all these different interventions that they're able to share with our gen ed teachers and use in the classrooms with all of the students. Data collection, and also brain and processing, because we all know every student learns differently, so they can bring different types of modalities and styles to the classroom setting.
All right, so building our schedules, we mentioned that building trusting relationships was a key component, and at the beginning we gave you the example of our RSP teacher having K through 5 on her caseload. So what did this mean? We're giving you a snapshot of what the day was before the transition. So this meant that she was able to spend a minimal amount of time in each classroom, not allowing her to truly co-teach and collaborate. I mean, can you imagine teaching 6 different grade levels? Close to impossible, right? And so in the transition, we were able to identify additional opportunities and allow more time for the teacher to go in and co-teach with that kinder class, with that 1st grade level class, and spend more time, which meant that she was able to provide more services in the general ed classroom. Any questions about that?
I do want to add something. I just want to add on before we move on. Mm-hmm. Sorry, was there a question? Did I miss that?
How your instructional assistants fit into that?
Okay, so her question was, how do our instructional assistants fit into that? So they actually work with our educational specialists to create a schedule together. So for example, there may be multiple teachers at the kindergarten level with students because we're not going to just dump all of our special education students into one classroom, right? So what we would do is we would have our educational specialist teacher go to 1 or 2 classrooms in the morning and send her paraprofessional to 2 other classrooms in the morning, and they'll switch vice versa. Does that make sense? Okay, Gabby, did you want to add anything to that? No? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But then when, like in the, at the end of the year,
Mm-hmm.
does the team sit down and try to like distribute like the IEP kids?
Yes. Okay, so her question is, at the end of the year, do the team sit down and try to distribute? So we actually are going to touch on that a little bit later, if you could just hold off on that. But I do want to add that we do understand the importance of the continuation of need and services, and we do understand that we are going to have our mod severe kiddos that we're going to try to incorporate as best as possible. But I just want to emphasize inclusive practices is just to the maximum extent appropriate, incorporating them into the classroom. So what we did back in the investigation phase is we identified different strengths. We looked at present levels, and we used those strengths as areas to incorporate them into the classroom settings. So our educational specialist teachers still have time to pull them out. They still have special needs. We incorporate that throughout the day, but we're trying to maximize their time in the general ed setting or the least restrictive setting. Okay, I just want to emphasize that a little bit.
All right, so the improve piece, we did at the close to the end of the year. This is our 4th I, right? Improve. And I'll let Kasey take this.
So can everyone say improve? Improve. Great. So every year, this is a constant evolution. We're always looking at what our new kids that are coming up need, right? We're always looking, even through the year right now, we're already looking and planning for next year and seeing which students match which classrooms the best, and those teachers based on their strengths and the student strengths, because we want to set up the teachers for success and the students, right? And so we're constantly changing those partnerships. And so with staff changing also, and I could get another student from another school tomorrow, and we might have to shift how our support team services those students. But this year we had a big staff change, and so we had to come together and see how we could actually change who serviced who. So we made sure that the caseloads were manageable, and that our educational specialists were actually felt comfortable the grade levels they were servicing too. So the year before, I had a teacher servicing the kinder and first grade students, second and third and fourth and fifth. And this last year we've had to split it up where I have one teacher servicing the kinder and the fifth grade based on our caseloads and needs, and where we had to concentrate other services and other grade levels. So it's always constantly refining it and seeing what strategies our teachers need too. So another example would be last year, we, in a certain grade level, we ended up having some students that had, with autism, that had some behaviors that our classroom teachers were not equipped to deal with. So that would be something that we brought in and did some extra PD for our teachers and our paraprofessionals to make sure that they had those strategies that some had been trained in years ago, but we had to remind them how to pull them out of their, their tool belt and be able to apply them. So they were both, the students and the teachers were successful.
And I also want to touch on celebrating successes, extremely, extremely important for this process, to keep it positive, to keep the buy-in, to keep the collaboration, even the small ones. And I can speak to what our administrator does at Jackson and myself. She will announce over the intercom at staff meetings any little successes that we have, we'll present and we'll talk about it. And we'll really celebrate it with everybody, because this keeps everyone on board. It keeps everyone excited about it. We learn from each other. I know we're constantly going to make mistakes. You can't give up. Let me tell you, our first year, there was a lot of mistakes that we kept coming into, but we continue to grow, and you just learn from them. And that's the point, is to constantly be willing to get up and try and bring it back to your kids and the students, because it really is all about them. So I'm going to stop right here and just ask a question. Can you talk about the scheduling? For example, how does the school set up their schedule to accommodate special education students, educational specialists who need to be pushing in to across multiple rooms and grade levels? Do you want to speak to that? Or Kasey, do you want to speak to that one a little bit?
I can speak to it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we each probably have something to add on to. It's a little bit different every year. I know this last year, we actually took cards out and students, based on their needs and minutes and stuff, and as a team, they actually allocated where they were going and what rooms they were going to. And then a lot of the time, when our teachers are pushing in to support and do a co-teaching piece, we'll pull out a couple of the other students from the next door and pull them all into that one classroom. And it's usually that teacher that it really feels like they want them in their classroom, right? And is part of that team that goes the extra mile and is a good fit for them. So it just, and then it might look different later on in another grade level based on their need. They might be placed with one teacher depending on their behaviors that year or the number of students that need to be serviced.
Yeah, in addition to that, if teachers need support with scheduling, and sometimes it is a lot to juggle, having to support multiple teachers and, curriculums, times, scheduling the paraprofessionals, everything is a lot to juggle. So I will come in to look at it together and plan together. So that I think that's really helped. Another thing I know Kasey and the school administrator at Jackson do is they put our special ed students first. So when we're doing our placement cards and when we're planning, we start with our students that have IEPs and place them first and match them up with somebody that could really support them and offer those services. And then we look at the other students, but we start with them.
Yeah, so definitely, we do that every year. Our cost team, before our teachers at Garfield actually help place kids and pair them up and make sure that we have equal classrooms because we spread out our students to make sure that everyone's supported. But we've already, as a cost team, as a coordination of services team, we've already pulled out those students and identified as a team where we think they would be the most successful and which teachers would be the most successful with them.
And I think this goes back to answer your question because that's also what we do at Jackson. Our administrator allows us to meet multiple times at the end of the year to strategically place our students. So you said with the cost team, we meet with the SPED team and the IPLT team, and we all strategically place our SPED students first, just to make sure there's equitable distribution across teachers, and then they also create their schedules. And what we've done is we've actually created some templates to make it a lot easier for our educational specialists to plan out their schedules. And on those templates, we've tried to organize them as best as possible. So we include our students, how many service minutes they need within the classroom setting, and also pulled out, we have to identify 2 different settings, also their paraprofessional, where they will be, which service minutes they'll be providing, and then additional service providers that they need to receive. So we try to include all of that on the schedule so we make sure we're taking into account everything when we strategically plan them and place them in classrooms.
And so as we've gotten actually better at this, is before school even starts, every single one of our educational specialists have to meet with the classroom teacher and go over like an IEP and a snapshot and kind of come up with some strategies and put it in writing so they actually have a folder so they feel like it's some place that the classroom teacher can keep going back to, right? Because they have 30 students or whatever number they have in their classroom, and to keep it all straight and to keep going back to it.
And to add on to that, this was probably scary for a lot of our general education teachers who maybe never had students with special education in their classrooms. So what I did is I provided on-site support to our general education teachers on IEP 101 training. What does that look like? What piece are you playing in this part for our students and with our educational specialists? In addition to behavioral supports and interventions, anything that they needed to feel supported in the classroom, in addition to whatever else our educational specialists could provide to them.
And then I do want to go back, oh, sorry.
One more question. Let me bring this to you, sorry.
So when you said that you reduced the caseload to like K1, 2, 3, are there like 3 special educators on each elementary school campus?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That is a
This
really
is
good
just
question.
one example.
Yes.
That's just one example at one of our school sites. Like we mentioned at the beginning, we're a really large district. We have 36 elementary schools. And so we have teachers, 5 or 6 ed specialists at some schools, and then other schools have 2. So it depends on the caseload number, the needs of the kids, etc. So with those schools that had 2 ed specialists, right, that was challenging because we still have K-5, but they had a lower caseload number, similar to other school sites, and so it was just juggling that schedule piece and making sure that that we allowed them opportunities to go into the general ed and co-teach. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes. Do you
So
wanna-
I do want to go back to the celebrations and
Okay.
successes, because it is really important to keep going back there. So when I took over my school, they had already been doing inclusive practices for about 3.5 years. And so they were able to do it academically in the classrooms, but our students still were kind of viewed when it was recess and lunchtime as being different, right? Those kids, they might have still been teased and bullied. So that was a piece that we worked on, making sure that it was almost seamless, like the transition and the services were more, oh, he's not in special ed, and it was really like we kind of just, those are services that we're providing and helping our students with. And so everything that we look at is that social emotional piece too, and making sure that they're included and they're not, if they are being pulled out, they're not missing assemblies and different things, that they're actually included with the general education population through that time also, and that we're constantly making sure that even the supervisors, our activity supervisors at the lunch tables or at recess or lunch, are trained in how to support those students too. So if they do have a behavioral problem or they have issues out there, that we're able to support them there too.
Okay, and we have a few questions from our virtual audience members. So one of them is, how many paraprofessionals are assigned to each educational specialist? Do you want to speak to that one
Yeah.
a little bit?
So most of our mild moderate teachers have 1 paraprofessional that's assigned to them, and they're either 3.75 hours or 4 hours. I know. So that was a little bit challenging. And other school sites, depending on the student needs, have additional support on top of that, but generally it's about 1 assigned per mild moderate teacher. So I hope that answers the question. What was the next one?
And the next one is, are you willing to share those scheduling templates? Yeah, I'm more than willing to share them. I'm sure someone can help me. I don't know if I can upload them or email them out, but I'd be more than willing to share.
All right. Okay, so as we were going through our presentation today, you may have noticed posters around the room. So I want you, if you haven't already, look around. So when we started this process and we identified the 4 I's of inclusive practices, we thought, it would be helpful as a good special ed teacher to have those anchor posters that our school administrators can use to communicate, because we're not all as proficient in that special ed lingo. We are not as knowledgeable in least restrictive environments, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we were all going in the same direction. So when we talked about including our kids more, when we talked about assigning or redistributing our staff and assigning different grade levels, we wanted to make sure that we're supported with that. The co-teaching piece and the scheduling piece, that was all there. And then we had our 4 I's of inclusive practices there as a constant reminder of that process, so that we can work on it year after year. And by the way, these posters are available online, so if you like them, they're yours. All right.
All right, so this is just a little bit of our data. We actually take the map assessment, and it shows us how our students are measuring in their growth. Does anyone else use the MAP assessment in their district?
Or NWA?
All right. So it's a progress. It shows how much growth our students have made from wherever they come in and wherever they end up at the spring. So our goal is always that our students are making at least a year's worth of progress or more, right? And so this kind of shows the growth comparison between our 2 years. And so when we're starting over at 3rd grade, we've had huge growth. Our students are making above 1.5. And then over here, we have our 4th grade. But then you kind of see the dip, right, in 5th grade. So every year it's kind of showing us something different. But we know that those students are actually different, right? They're not measuring the same students. It's just measuring that same grade level. So it's kind of showing us, okay, as they get up to 5th grade, that we do know that we have more gaps to fill, but that our students every year are different. But it kind of shows us that our students are making, our students with IEPs that are in our inclusive classes are making great gains.
And I just want to add, Kasey, that as I go out to support school sites and school teams and grade levels, we also use this information to allow us to see where we need more support, right? So if we see growth happening in, for example, the 3rd, 4th grade level, that's not as much as a concern as 5th grade would be. So we focus on those and we target those grade levels so we can support our teachers in turn to support our students.
So in addition to looking at our instructional needs of our students, we also were able to accomplish another goal using inclusive practices, which has to do with our school climate and culture. So this is the California Healthy Kids survey results from last year. We gave it to all of our parents and staff. And as you can see here, the majority of their perceptions is that their learning environment is supportive and inviting. We promote academic success for all of our students. It's a safe place for our students. School takes parents' concerns seriously, and I can really speak to this because what we did prior to the implementation of inclusive practices is we had a very large breakfast where we invited all of our parents to come out to our school, and we also invited district personnel to come. And what we did is we talked about what we wanted to implement at Jackson prior to doing this to our parents. We had our entire special education team and our inclusive practices leadership team present to answer any questions and clarify anything for our parents so that they felt comfortable and included in the entire process. Because we know that this sounds a little bit scary maybe at first, and there may be a lot of apprehension, so we really wanted to make sure we are including everyone, including our parents, all stakeholders, because that really helps when we're transforming the school. Do you want to go on to the next one? So again, this is more of our data from our parents and staff. We encourage parent involvement. We really, really do. Parents feel welcome to participate. We return phone calls, emails, invite them to any meetings that we may have. Staff responses, supportive and inviting place to work, promote staff trust. They participate in all decision making. So as Gabby said earlier, we're really using this information to see and identify if there are any changes that we need to make in order to make sure that they feel included in this process. And most importantly, how do our students feel? All of our students, general education and special education. So as you can see here from the percentages, a majority of our teachers and adults treat students with respect. They feel safe at school. They make it clear that bullying is not allowed. They feel motivated to learn. We teach students to respect each other, and they're happy to be at school. Okay, so now we want to share with you some stories of how inclusive practices really changed the lives and the journey of some of our students. This student here is from Jackson. He is a 3rd grader in the general education classroom. He actually came to us from Fontana School District. He was in a special day classroom all day. So it was a big change for him coming to Jackson. But after the first 2 days of school, he went home and told his mom, "Oh my God, Mom, I'm not in special education anymore. I have so many friends. I'm so happy to be at school." So Mom came in and shared this with us. And you could really see in the classroom all of his peers, I mean, the interactions that are there. He really felt a part and connected to the school and the classroom. And it also taught our other students that compassion piece and accepting diversity and different ways of learning.
All right,
talk about
and so
yours?
we'll just call this student, this is Sunshine, because she was the ray of sunshine. We had her all the way from kindergarten, and then she got promoted last year and left us because she's a 6th grader now. But she not only had physical challenges, but also academic challenges. But because she was in an inclusive environment all the way up, she actually was one of the most popular students at school. Everyone knew her in her classroom. She was like the social butterfly. When they were doing Project Lead the Way, we're a pilot school for Project Lead the Way and engineering. And so she was there telling everybody what to do and where to fit pieces in. And so she was just one of our students that we just love to rave about. She was able to participate at the Kids Run OC, even in how she is right now. And so given that environment where she's included instead of being excluded or segregated or sent to another room, really had a lot of success.
Okay, and this is another one of our students, and she actually started at Jackson prior to the inclusive model and the inclusive setting. And she has some very high social emotional needs and academic needs. So again, she's in the general ed setting now, and we have seen across the past 3 years such a tremendous growth in her social emotional development and her social skills. Just like your student, she is Miss Popular, probably the most popular girl on our campus. Everyone knows her. She has many responsibilities. She's done the announcements for us before. She's like a social butterfly, as you said. She really enjoys it. But what we've noticed the most and what our teachers have noted is the most impactful is how all of her non-disabled peers are with her, the compassion towards her. They really help model what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. They know how to effectively interact with her, and they actually try to teach her when she's doing something maybe inappropriate. They help her at lunch and recess. So we've seen some dramatic changes across the board with this student here, but not just with her. We've seen how she's impacted the journey for a lot of our other peers, our general education peers. So it's been really great, and our teachers will speak to that. We're going to show you a little bit later.
And I would have to like piggyback on that. They use their superpowers and they end up changing the rest of the world or the rest of the school.
Yes.
and get the other students to actually learn from them and become better
They
too.
do.
All right, so we're going to do a group activity. We have a few quotes that we've collected recently from both our general ed and our special ed teachers, and we asked them what their feelings were so far with inclusive practices. We want you to take a minute to read this quietly to yourself, and then after you've done that, we're going to share with a partner. All right. So now we'd like you to turn over to somebody next to you. Talk about what stood out for you. Is there something that really stood out for you? You can jump in somewhere. We're going to have you turn. All right. So what were some of the things that your partners shared with you? Is there something that stood out?
Well, we talked about, it's challenging at the beginning, but now she's doing good life.
Right, right. Anybody else?
How much everybody learns, not just the special needs kids.
Exactly, exactly. She definitely learned in the process. Bianca, can you comment on that? It's
Yes.
a teacher from your school site.
Yeah, so this is one of our inclusive general education teachers. She was very, very apprehensive in the beginning of this process. And I think you can see how her mindset has kind of changed and evolved. She really talks about how it truly was challenging in the beginning, but there has been so many positive outcomes. And when she speaks to that, she continues every year to tell us that she would never change the type of setting that she's working in now.
All right, so let's do another one. We want you to take a few seconds to read this over. Talk to somebody next to you after you're done reading.
So, because we're not walking around with the mic, we just have to repeat what they say.
Okay, if you can turn over to your partner or your table and just talk about some of the things that stood out.
That's it. When she started. When I say you can go
All right, so what were some of those things that stood out for you? How about the back of the room? Seems to be a little quiet back there. Okay, we'll start with the lady and then we'll go over to you. Yes.
The importance of the collaborative model.
Yes.
And truly doing it collaboratively where you're respecting people and people's differences and just continuing to move forward.
So respecting the differences and truly collaborating with one another. And then
my partner, who is wiser than I, was sharing that what we kind of hear from this individual is sort of the excitement being an educational specialist, of contributing their knowledge and their skills, their thoughts about curriculum and meeting the needs of all learners. And I think, they had put in there that in a collaborative model can be respectful and creative endeavor. And
Right.
I think we would all like to be involved in
Yeah.
creative and respectful endeavors, so that's good.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. We're going to do one more. So we have 2 quotes here. Just pick one of them, and then we'll talk about it again. So take a minute to read it over. Okay, make sure you get a minute to talk to your partner or your table.
I'm gonna walk around again.
No, it's fine, actually. That's too much of what you can say. It's like, we wanted to, when we interviewed them, we wanted them to be honest and completely frank. We promised we didn't solicit only positive, but we were so pleased to see the feedback that we got from them was positive.
Okay.
All right, so we want to hear from you. What were some of the things that stood out from these 2 ed specialists? What about our ed specialists in the room? What are some of the things that stood out for you?
Well, we can all learn from each other at all times. I mean, everybody's got something different that they can contribute. I'm an education specialist and I teach lots of your kids. I would love to learn something that the gen ed
Exactly.
teachers, do that might help my
Yes,
kids.
yes,
There's always
absolutely.
that piece that you can learn from each other.
We can all learn from each other. We all bring something to the table, right? Anything else? Okay.
So I just want to note before we move on, when collecting this information from our teachers, I really, really encourage them to be as open and honest as possible, because we do use this to constantly make changes and evolve and see where the areas of need are. So we were extremely, extremely pleased to see how happy they were with what we're doing. And they did speak to it being challenging and hard, and we did talk about that, and that comes up in our discussions all the time. But I think we were all extremely pleased to see what they had to say. Okay, so this is a video that we took at Jackson last year. And so what we did is we interviewed our educational specialist teachers and our general education teachers. We really wanted to get a feel for their perceptions after the implementation of inclusive practices, and what changes did they notice in their classroom settings with both their general education students and their students in special education.
I came into this school with their, they have an amazing philosophy of just having access and equity for all students, and that's what I actually was looking for, just coming into a school where they have a belief that all kids are able to learn.
I think it's so successful here because it's very student driven. We focus on what the students need, and yes, of course, there's obstacles and scheduling and things of, like that, but the focus is the kids, and when we have issues or conversations, we always go back to how can we help the students? And it's a very student-focused model, and I think that's what makes it successful in terms of teacher collaboration, parent inclusiveness, and the inclusiveness of our students.
Well, I have one half of my room is gate and one half is gen ed. And like I mentioned earlier, everyone has a talent. And that's what I tapped into. The gay kids, they have really high ability in the academics, and the other children, I said, you know what? We all have a brain, we just use it differently. And then pretty soon the kids, it was like a mantra. It was like a mantra. They would go to their support teacher and say, you know, Mrs. Wallstead says, we're all gay. We just use our brain differently. And so I feel success that way, that they made that mantra their own. They said, they took it to heart and said, hey, you know what? I'm smart too. I'm just using my brain differently. Yeah.
Behaviors have decreased. In the beginning, they increased because it was something so new, especially with our mod severe students and getting accustomed to being in the general education classroom with so many more kids. But once time went on, the behaviors have decreased. Our staff is all being very open-minded and supportive to all of our students here. It's not so much your students versus our students, it's all of our students, so it's been very positive.
Yes, you know that it's going to be a challenge. Again, I don't have a special ed credential. However, that was my fear. But as I'm doing this is my second year. I have grown with a little bit more experience. I have learned more. I have interacted with other special ed teachers that had guide me and get me through this whole process. And again, administrators support. It's amazing because they're always like, do you need anything else? What can I do to make your job a little bit easier? And it's great. I think that's great. That makes it easier for us.
Most of my kids came at kinder level, and within 2 months and a half, 3 months, they've grown at least 2 years. So I'm very happy. Yeah, they're like second grade, and yeah. So I think that it works. I think that this is a great way to have all our students included and be part of it, because that's how society is. It's all inclusive, no separation.
Well, when the classes were being formed for this new school year, it was presented to me to have an inclusion class or just a regular gen ed class, and I was given, myself and another colleague, we were given, these are the choices, what would you have? And I didn't really have that option because the other gal had seniority over me. So I just said, I'll take whatever. I just don't want to leave kindergarten. So I got the inclusion class, and I was pretty scared. I was terrified, not for the reasons you think, but just I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it. I wasn't sure about the level of support I would get. I didn't want to trigger, any of these children, and how would I ease them? And it was very scary for me. And once this classroom started and whatnot, I had great support, and it just really became this really beautiful thing. One of the things that we were told was, you want the special ed children to be in with the gen ed population, because the gen ed population will be role models for them. And what I saw was that, but I also saw my gen ed kids just start to take ownership of these children and protect them and guide them. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. And it was something unexpected. And I will continue to do this. I was scared in the beginning, but I would do it over and over again. So that was my my feeling at the beginning, and now it's kind of done a 180.
We don't have special ed banks. We don't have special ed malls or special ed bookstores. So why are we having this group of our students segregated? And the way I see it, which might be a little bit to the extreme, but it's segregation like we did in the 40s with Hispanic children or with African Americans. I see it the same way, and we can't have that. They are part of us, and they are able to function. We just have to accommodate their needs. And my staff, the teachers, they do it beautifully. They do it beautifully.
All right, so we leave you with this quote: inclusion is not simply about just the physical proximity. It is about intentional planning for the students intentional planning for the success of all of our students, right? We have about 3 minutes left. Before I allow some questions to come in, let's review those 4 steps of inclusive practices. Ready? Okay, what's our first one? Investigate, invite, implement, and improve. Excellent. So we leave you with that. We hope you can take something today to your school site or to your district that you can apply. Again, we have about 2 minutes left. I did get a question from one of our virtual audience member that I'll read. Please clarify the grading system. Do you mean 2 students may have the same grade while one does not meet the standards? Well, not all of our students meet the standards, whether they be special ed or non-special ed, or we might have students that have an IEP meet the standards. So grade report cards are individualized like anything else. Okay.
So they would be compared to, on our regular report card, they're given the same, they're held accountable the same way.
Correct.
As a general education student. They just get an additional progress report at a different time in the year, and then they get their, their IEP.
Right, and to piggyback off of that, what we've done is we've aligned our progress reports for our IEPs with when they get their report cards. So our general education teachers and educational specialist teachers, collab and work on the report card together. But when they're in that meeting, parents are also being presented on their progress report towards their IEP goals. So again, bringing it back to making it positive. What are they really working towards? This is what's happening in the classroom, but this is how we're supporting them, and this is where they're at.
Okay, we had a question back there. Oh,
I was just going to clarify too about the report cards, because we've had that in our district.
Yeah.
With standards-based report cards, it's kind of, they're either meeting it or they're nearing it or whatever.
Correct.
And that's done regardless of whether you're special ed or not.
Right.
And like you were saying, what we do in the parent conferences, we go over this saying, we know your child needs extra support, and then go to the
Yes.
IEP progress report. But parents also have a right to know what those standards are.
That's right.
Exactly.
Realistically on it.
Thank you for that comment. Thank you. Any other questions that we can answer at this point?
It also helps when we're gauging our IEPs too, and we're looking at those individual goals. Our goal is to get those goals and get those students up to those same expectations, right? They should always be building them up. And at times, we've kind of taken some of those standards away from them, but this kind of puts it out there. Okay, so we should be supporting them with those goals so they are having access to the grade level standards.
All right, so it is 4:15, and we do want to honor your time, so if you do need to leave, we completely understand. We'll stay behind to answer more questions. We leave you with our emails in case you have any questions, individual questions for us. You're welcome to shoot us an email. All right, so thank you very much.